Grace and peace to you in the name of God the Creator, Christ the Redeemer, and the Spirit who sustains us. Amen. Today is the culmination of our journey through the season of Epiphany, where we have been exploring Jesus' proclamation of the good news that the reign of God is at hand. We've explored story after story of people who don't recognize Jesus' divinity, even as his influence and authority continue to grow. Today is no different. Jesus asks an important question for the disciples and for us. Who do you say that I am? We all have a picture of Jesus in our minds, an idea or an image of who Jesus is and what Jesus does. And while there's probably a lot of overlap between who each of us thinks that Jesus is, there are probably some differences too. We each have a slightly different picture. And that is just as true of the disciples as it is of us. Think about it. In your family or in your circle of friends, does everyone have exactly the same picture of you? How accurate are those pictures? The people who know you the best have the most complete pictures of you, but there are still pieces that are missing because no one except you has the lived experience of being you. The same is true of Jesus. If we were to look back over the Gospel of Mark since the events of last Sunday's text, we would discover that he has tried to go away with the disciples for some time of rest after they returned from visiting the surrounding towns. But the people followed them. He taught them and then performed the miracle of the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes to feed them. The Pharisees and some religious scholars have set a verbal trap for him, and he questioned their motives and their faith. He healed people and taught people and fed the crowds again, and through it all, no one's picture of Jesus has expanded to recognize that he is truly the Messiah. Even the disciples don't get it. And he has gotten a little testy about it. So in this morning's text, when he asks the disciples who people say that he is, there is all this weight behind that question. The disciples answer the same way Herod's courtiers had answered. Some people say he's John the Baptist, others say he's Elijah, and others say he's a prophet. And then when Jesus asks the disciples who they say that he is, Peter finally gets it right. Kind of. You're the Messiah, he says. But he and the other disciples have the wrong idea of what it means to be the Messiah, and they have a hard time when Jesus challenges that image. He tells them that to be the Messiah means suffering, being rejected, and being put to death to rise again 3 days later. But they expect the Messiah to be a great religious and political figure who comes in to challenge the might of Rome with force if needed. They expect him to restore people's faith, reaffirm the covenant with God, and place himself on the throne of Judah. Peter and the disciples are making their hopes and expectations of who Jesus will be into an idol. They don't realize it, but they are. And so Peter pulls Jesus aside to tell him all the ways he's wrong because Peter can't quite face his picture of Jesus being wrong. And Jesus chastises him for it, but Peter refuses to learn the lesson that Jesus is trying to teach him. Then Jesus tells them all what it means to be Jesus' follower. He's trying to broaden their pictures of him, to make them fuller, more accurate representations. If they truly want to follow the Messiah, they are called to resist the divine claims of the emperor and to pay the price for it. It is important that they recognize that Jesus will suffer for daring to suggest that God presents an alternative to the status quo. And it is important that they recognize that if they truly want to follow Jesus into this alternative reality, they will suffer too. But ultimately, they will have freedom in God. That's a hard truth to swallow. No wonder they're having trouble adjusting their images of who Jesus is. And we know that Peter still isn't getting the true picture of Jesus' identity. 6 days after these events, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up to a mountaintop. Peter had a brief moment the week before of recognizing Jesus' divinity, but now, for some reason, Peter has gone from calling Jesus Messiah, the promised one, to Rabbi, teacher. And when Elijah and Moses appear, Peter suggests building them 3 shelters like the people used when they wandered in the wilderness. He does not see who Jesus is, and so he puts him on even footing with Elijah and Moses. But Peter can't put Jesus in a box any more than we can. And so when Peter and the other disciples attempt to define Jesus by the traditional understanding of who a Messiah will be, Jesus refuses to allow it to happen. And beyond that, he challenges them about what it means to follow the Messiah. Being Messiah is not just about who I am, Jesus tells them. It's about who you are too. In Mark's gospel, Peter gets it wrong more often than he gets it right. He has one moment of recognizing that Jesus is the Messiah, but then he tries to get in the way of Jesus' ministry, not once in this text, but twice. And it isn't because he thinks Jesus is wrong. It's because he doesn't see Jesus clearly. Jesus doesn't match the picture he has in his head. These are hard lessons for Peter and the other disciples to learn, and hard lessons for us to learn as well. We don't love the idea that in order to follow Jesus, we have to deny ourselves, pick up the cross. But although Peter doesn't know yet what cross Jesus is talking about, we do. Or at least we think we do. But I don't think Jesus is talking about his own cross. I think he's talking about our cross. We may not have an emperor anymore who claims to be divine, but there are plenty of false gods that try to claim our attention and that threaten to separate us from God. And often there is intense societal pressure to follow these gods. The false god of competition over collaboration. The false god of fear and division instead of unity and inclusion. The false god of scarcity. And those false gods try to lead us to believe that there isn't enough to go around. Enough generosity. Enough resources. Enough love and compassion. Those false gods try to tell us that someone will always be on the outside looking in, and that's okay. That's just how things work. And the cross that we bear is the weight of those false gods pressing down on us, and our attempt to deny those gods and follow Jesus. That can be a scary thing to do. Working towards collaboration and unity and inclusion and plenty for all threatens to make us the outcasts, because those things are not the norm in our world. But when we find ourselves on the outside for daring to pick up that cross and follow, we find Jesus. We find the promised love and freedom and forgiveness. But like Peter, we still get it wrong sometimes too. Occasionally, like Peter, we have a flash of insight and recognize Jesus' divinity for what it is. Occasionally, we sense Jesus in all his glory, like Peter and James and John did when they saw him standing with Elijah and Moses. And like Peter, who offered to build shelters for the three, we want to cling to this moment of divinity. We want to find a way to stay on that mountaintop with Jesus. But that gets in the way of Jesus' ministry and work in the world. And it is not what we are called to do as followers. And so when a voice from heaven says to us, "This is my beloved, my own, listen to this one," that is our reminder not to stand in Jesus' way. That is our reminder that Jesus is not just a prophet, not just an image of wonder and grace. It's a reminder that there is work to do if we are truly to be followers of Christ. And it's a reminder to not only listen to Jesus, but to allow our image of Jesus to be challenged. The question, who is Jesus, is the driving force behind Mark's gospel from the beginning, and it should be a driving force in our lives of faith. As Americans, we are good at giving lip service to who we think Jesus is, but we don't always act like Jesus is actually God. We don't always treat others very well, especially people we don't like or don't agree with. We sometimes even go so far as to dehumanize others, denying them permission to have their own beliefs or express their own thoughts. But as Christians, and particularly as Lutherans who believe in the doctrine of salvation by grace through faith, we try to suggest that Jesus is on the side of all creation, that Jesus is even on the side of our enemies. That's hard for us because we often want Jesus' blessings for ourselves, but not for them. So when Jesus tells us to deny ourselves and pick up our crosses, and when Jesus calls us down off that mountaintop, he is calling us to be better. He is reminding us that the world is bigger than what we can see, bigger than the perspectives we hold. And so is Jesus. The depth of God's love is deeper than we can imagine. So who do you say that Jesus is? My picture of Jesus changes over time, but every time I picture Jesus, it starts with love. Deep, abiding, transformative love. Amen.